All set? Okay. Well, good morning. My name is John Torrey, the Mayor, and I'm the Chair of the Executive Committee, and the Clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, and I'll welcome my colleagues as well from the Executive Committee and call the 26th meeting of the Executive Committee to order. Today's meeting is being held with the members of the Executive Committee participating both in person, and that amounts to me here at City Hall, and by video conference. The other members of the committee are on video conference. The staff are also connecting to the meeting by video conference. The public continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live at YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. These measures, of course, are necessary, and the different ways in which people are participating in the meetings due to public health guidelines to prevent the spread of COVID-19. And these things are all under continuous review so that we can, as soon as it seems appropriate in light of the health situation, return things as we're used to them more to normal at the City Hall. The clerk staff in this arrangement have connected all registered speakers to the meeting by audio. The list of speakers can be viewed online. It's very short today by visiting the Executive Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. And of course, as we've done throughout the period of the pandemic, which is longer than any of us thought, we ask for your patience if there are any technical issues, but it's been fairly good through the course of all these meetings. The City Clerk has provided all of the agenda materials via the Clerk's meeting portal, and Clerk's IT staff are available to participants to help with your devices should you encounter any difficulties. As part of each agenda item, I'll ask members to raise their hand or unmute their mic if they wish to question staff or to speak. I will then create a speakers list and will call on members when it is their turn to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I would ask that members ensure that they turn on their video and raise their hand to indicate their vote, because with a relatively small number here at the Executive Committee, we do all votes in that manner. I want to remind you, members, that you must submit and approve your motions by email, and staff are available at exc@toronto.ca to help with motions. If there's any visiting members of Council attending the meeting today, I encourage you as well to turn on your video so that I know that you're present and I can give you an opportunity to ask questions or to speak. This will also assist the clerk staff in keeping a record of attendance for the meeting. I will now proceed to do the land acknowledgement and to say that although we're in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I will now ask, pursuant to the legislation, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and ask any member who does have an interest to please raise your hand, unmute your mic, and declare that interest. And of course, there's a form to be filled out. Any interest for today? I see none. The next is that we need a motion to confirm the minutes of the regular meeting of the Executive Committee held on July 6th, 2021, moved by Councillor McKelvey. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. I will just say a word, if I may, colleagues, about Public Service Week. We had a town hall meeting that the city manager and myself, and I think probably a number of you have participated in some events that are recognizing, as well we should, especially this year, but every year, the work done by the people who are our partners here at City Hall and throughout the city working in the Toronto Public Service. There are 37,000 members of the Toronto Public Service, and they are they have been, during the course of this past year and a half, remarkable in their ability to continue to deliver services to the people of the City of Toronto, but they are year in and year out, pandemic in and pandemic out, a group of people that it's very appropriate we should pay tribute to all the time, let alone once a year. They keep things open, they keep things going, they demonstrate huge professionalism and compassion in doing their work. And I think at no time has that ever been more evident than in the past year and a half, when all of the city services, almost without exception, were kept going, sometimes dramatically changed and sometimes dramatically altered, but the determination was there on the part of our public service to make the changes and to do what had to be done, modify these services so that they could be provided safely to people, but provided nonetheless. This year, that's 18 months of that. This year, 2021, things of course shifted a lot in the direction of the vaccines and the administration of the vaccines. And again, I think one of the reasons that Toronto has put in a performance that is globally respected in the context of the number of people we've had vaccinated and how we've gone about that, including particular attention to groups that are more vulnerable is, again, a tribute to the hard work of lots of people, including our health partners and so on, but also particularly including members of the Toronto Public Service. And now we also know, as we move into looking forward, that as we want Toronto to come back stronger than ever, to use the expression that we are using in a lot of our interface with foreign investors and other people, even with the people here, it's going to be, again, the same Toronto Public Service, same people who are going to be back to a more normal manner of carrying out their duties and helping us to support small businesses and to help the local economies of the city, to help, make sure we can provide people with comfortable, safe public transportation and so on. And so I just want to, on behalf of my colleagues, and maybe we can do one of those things where we give a little round of applause, just to indicate that we otherwise might find a way to do in a room, how much we appreciate the efforts of our public service partners and how much we thank you for a job extremely well done on behalf of the people during the pandemic, but a job that's well done all the time. And so thank you, and I'm sorry that there's not more we can do in person during Public Service Week. But I think you know that in these circumstances, these words, on behalf of my colleagues and all the members of City Council, and I think all the people of the City of Toronto, reflect our heartfelt appreciation for everything you do. It's been a remarkable 18 months, hopefully not to be repeated in the context of a pandemic, but you have performed in a remarkable manner on behalf of the people we all serve. So thank you. All right, let's go through the agenda, colleagues. And the first item is item 26.1. There's a staff report with recommendations. Is there anybody wishing to hold this item? Okay, did you say you want to hold it, James, or you want to move the recommendations?
Mayor, let's hold for questions for staff.
Oh, okay. Well, item 26.1 is held down for Councillor Pasternak. Item EX 26.2, redevelopment of 260 Adelaide. There's a letter from the Create TO Board with recommendations and a report from staff with recommendations. Is there anyone who wishes to hold this item? Held, but no. Deputy Mayor Bylaw moves the two reports and the recommendations that go with them. And there's a... Yes, but we can do that right now, can we not? Yes, so we've just put up on here, this is the consolidation, I'll call it that, of the recommendations that are made here that we have to approve to send it forward. And I'm assuming that that's what Councillor Deputy Mayor Bylaw is moving. And so those are so moved, and I'll call the question if there's no comments or questions. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I can now see everybody. Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item EX 26.3 is a procedures bylaw for the Yonge-Dundas Square Board of Management. There's a staff report with a recommendation. It's fairly straightforward. Is there anybody wishing to hold that down for any reason? Otherwise, Deputy Mayor Thompson, I see just eager, chomping at the bit to move the staff recommendations, and I thank him for that. And if there's no other comments or questions, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.4, approval of recommended retention schedules for accountability records of the Lobbyist Registrar. Again, this is a fairly routine matter. There is a staff report with a recommendation. Anybody wishing to hold this down? Okay, seeing none, I will ask then if somebody wants to move the staff recommendations. Seeing Councillor Ainsley doing that, and I will then call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.5, the capital variance report for the 6 months ended June 30th, 2021. There's a staff report with a recommendation, and Councillor Crawford did tell me that although these did not go to the Budget Committee, he's had a chance to review them all, and if there's no one else wishing to hold it down, I would ask Councillor Crawford if he would move the staff recommendations. So moved. Mr. Mayor. Any other questions or comments? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.6, the operating variance report for the 6 months ended June 30th, 2021. Is there anybody, same thing, Councillor Crawford has had a chance to review these. Anybody wishing to hold this down? Did you want to hold it down, Deputy Mayor? Okay, Deputy Mayor Bylaw will hold this down. Item EX 26.7, obligatory reserve funds, deferred revenues and reserves, and council directed reserve funds, accumulated surplus at June 30th, 2021. This, again, is a fairly routine report that comes forward just to inform us of the status of those different kinds of funds. I would recommend it for a good reading for people who oftentimes talk about the magnitude of the reserves we have, which are substantial, and I'm proud of that, but most of them are spoken for because oftentimes people think that's a big pot of money that we just have sitting around waiting for somebody to do something with it. Is there anybody wishing to hold this down? Okay, if not, then I'll ask again, Councillor Crawford will move the recommendation in the staff report, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.8, 2020 Development Charge Reserve Fund Statement. It's the same thing. It's an annual reporting with a report with the staff recommendation. Is there anybody wishing to hold this down? Okay, if not, I'll ask Councillor Crawford. He so moved the staff recommendation. I will ask, call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 26, EX 26.9, Toronto Water 2021 Capital Budget and 2022-2030 Capital Plan Adjustments. Again, fairly routine reporting. Does anybody want to hold this down? Okay, well then I'll ask Councillor Crawford again. He so moved the staff recommendation. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.10, filling vacancies in the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee membership. There's a letter from the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee with recommendations on how to fill these vacancies. It seems quite straightforward. Is there anybody wishing to hold this down? Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion to approve the recommendation contained in the letter. Councillor McKelvey, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.11, request for presentation on the city budgeting process and initiatives relevant to the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. As you know, this is a new advisory committee that's just been established. I think it's having its first meeting. It's on my schedule coming up shortly, and they wanted to have pardon me, the city manager and the budget, the chief financial officer come and talk to them about the budget. There's a recommendation contained in the letter here. Can I ask for someone to move the recommendation if no one's holding it? Deputy Mayor Thompson. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Similarly, item 26.12 is a request for a presentation on the city plan for confronting anti-black racism. This is the action plan that actually already exists, and this new committee, newly appointed committee, would like a presentation on that. And so there's a recommendation contained in the letter coming from the CARB committee, and I'll ask, I see Deputy Mayor Thompson's willing to move that. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 26.13 is a proposed name change for the advisory committee to change the name as per the committee's own wishes. And so the letter comes from that committee with recommendations. Anybody wanting to hold this? Otherwise, I'll ask for someone to move, Councillor Ainsley, the recommendations contained in the letter and call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.14, reviewing City of Toronto policies governing the use of libraries and city facilities by individuals and groups promoting intolerance or discrimination. This is a letter, there is a letter from the LGBTQ 2+ advisory committee with recommendations. Does anyone wish to hold this item? Otherwise, I'll ask Councillor Ainsley has moved the adoption of the recommendations. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.15, protecting vulnerable persons and reducing homelessness. This is a letter from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee with recommendations. Anybody wanting to hold this item? Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion to approve the recommendation contained in the letter, moved by Councillor Ainsley. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 26.16, that is being held in my name because there's one speaker we have today who will speak on that matter, and the medical officer of health, as I understand it, can be available for that. And I would propose, with your concurrence, members of the committee, we deal with that first because we had arranged for the medical officer of health to be available in case she was called upon to answer questions or anything like that. So if you're agreeable, we'll deal with that first when we finish the rundown here. Item 26.17, EX 26.17, implementation of an E-Petition platform at the City of Toronto. I think, Councillor Ainsley, you have a motion on that?
Yes, I do, Mayor Tory. I have a motion asking for deferral on this item until our next meeting, January 2022, which doesn't have a date yet, so I can have some more consultation on this with the city clerk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Azzi. So Councillor Azzi has proposed the deferral of this matter until the January meeting of the Executive Committee. Are there any questions of the mover or other comments people wish to make? Otherwise, I'll call the question on his motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So that would bring us back then to deal first with your agreement with item EX 26.16. We do have the one deputant, which is Derek Moran. Is he? He's not there? Oh, okay, he's not present. Okay, on that basis, I think, do we also, am I right, have Dr. Davila with us in case there are any questions that any of you had of her or staff? Councillor McKelvey, did you have a question? There's Dr. Davila.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a quick question. I have seen that some of our clinics are now giving other vaccines for HPV, hepatitis, etc. You know, we have children in grade 7 and 8 that miss those shots. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that initiative, how long it'll be going on, where we could find the information to share with people about that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. You're quite right. We do have in our 5 fixed clinic sites at that we're running as a city in Toronto Public Health, what we're calling the school immunization program. So we have a program of vaccines that we normally deliver in schools to grade 7 and 8 students. This includes the hepatitis B vaccine, meningococcal vaccine, and human papillomavirus vaccine. And unfortunately, as a result of the pandemic, these programs have not been able to be offered in schools as they normally are to middle school students. So we're trying to catch up and make sure that this protection that's provided by these vaccines is given to those kids who unfortunately missed the opportunity to get that vaccine as a result of COVID-19. So it's currently being offered within our 5 fixed clinic locations across the city. There is an appointment booking process online, and all the information is available on our website. So we are promoting it particularly amongst those students rather than bringing a broad campaign, because it is a program specifically for a particular set of students.
And if you have students, you know, for example, I have one in grade 9, I don't know what she got because she got it at school. I don't know if she needs another one. How do we figure that out or navigate that? Like, because, you know, how are these vaccines being tracked, and how do we know who needs it and who doesn't?
So through the chair, we do have a process. This is a routine process that we run into as part and parcel of our regular program. Again, a lot of the information is available on our website. And if there are any questions around what is still outstanding, I would absolutely direct people to call us and or go to our website and click through the appropriate links. The information is available, and we're certainly happy to help people figure out what they are due for and how best to meet those needs.
And then last question, the vaccine passports and timing, and how are we, and I see you're getting printers and things to help people on that, but what is the timeline that's expected for this to be fully implemented? I know it's not your purview, but I was just wondering if you could kind of answer that as my last question.
So through the chair, my understanding, I mean, again, you're quite right, Councillor, this is within provincial purview, so we're beholden on their timing. My understanding is that within about a month's time, we should expect to have a more technologically based app to support the vaccine certification and verification process. In the meantime, it is through the receipts that are available through the provincial website. And it is a combination of both the vaccine receipt and personal ID that's required to be shown at those locations that require vaccine certification under the provincial regulation.
Councillor McKelvey?
I said thank you, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Thompson, followed by Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Dr. Davila. Good morning, Doctor. Dr. Davila, in the past few days, there's been a number of newspaper reports regarding Pfizer and testing of vaccines for children ages 5 to 11. I just wonder if you could comment and provide us with some information on that and your perspective. And part of the reason why I ask this, because I have already been asked by several of my constituents as to when that's going to be available and so on. And of course, I don't know. So you're the closest person that I know to the Pfizer process. And again, I want to just thank you for your outstanding leadership.
So through the chair, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you as well for asking for information from a reliable source. I'd like to think of information regarding a vaccine. So you're quite right. Earlier this week, Pfizer did issue a news release indicating some early findings around the safety and effectiveness of the product that they're testing for COVID-19 vaccination for 5 to 11-year-olds. There are still more data that need to come in. And what needs to happen is that that company and any other vaccine company that's interested in providing a vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds must provide a complete set of data to Health Canada or the relevant regulatory authority. In the US, that's the FDA. They need to undergo their review process before we are in a position to say that there's a product licensed for use for 5 to 11-year-olds. How that product then gets rolled out, assuming that licensure occurs, is dependent on the provincial process. They get to determine how best those products are rolled out. So we are awaiting word from Health Canada regarding receipt of a full application. They will do their licensure process and the other work that's done at the federal level. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization provides advice on how best to use vaccines. And then the province makes its decision on how to implement the vaccine. And we, of course, are the implementers on the ground. And once we have word from those higher levels of government, we'll be ready to go. So we are prepared and are actively planning for precisely this vaccine campaign.
Thank you for that. Just a final question in terms of enforcement regarding vaccine passport or certificate. I realize that businesses have been asked or will be asked to do more in terms of enforcement and so on, but at the same time, our MLS officers and your folks in the MOH and Toronto Public Health will be asked to do more as well. I'm just wondering whether or not there's been any discussions with the province at the various tables with respect to assisting with resources to help us to do the enforcement. And I guess a subset to that question is, will that be part of our responsibility, or is it just simply in the domain of the provincial government?
So through the chair, I don't know that I have a complete and total answer on how we're going to manage all the enforcement, particularly the MLS side of things. But overall, Deputy Mayor, I would say this, we are certainly keeping track of costs and resources that are required in order to respond effectively to COVID-19. Certainly from our perspective at Toronto Public Health, the kinds of costs that we incur in respect of enforcement of provincial regulations is captured in that accounting, and we will certainly be submitting and seeking reimbursement for costs as per the provincial rules around what will be reimbursed as part of the COVID-19 response.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mayor. Those are all my questions.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Moving on then to Councillor Pasternak.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through you to the Chief Medical Officer. We all know that the mass vaccination clinics are slowly closing. Hangar is closed now, and a subunit of Humber River at the Downsview Arena will be closing. Pop-up clinics. Many of the people unvaccinated are working night shifts and 3 jobs. Are there any 24/7 options across the city where people could get vaccinated in the off hours? We did experiment with that, I think, in a couple of pharmacies, but I don't know what's ongoing now. Are we continuing with that model?
So through the chair, Councillor, as far as the city is concerned, or clinics that are run by the city and Toronto Public Health, we do not have 24/7 clinics. We do have clinics at a variety of different locations, mobile clinics that are going all over the city and being set up in accordance with the epidemiology and the data around where vaccination coverage is still lagging. And as well, our hospital partners and other healthcare partners also have a variety of these fixed and mobile clinics that are operating at different hours. You're right, there continue to be other providers, primary care providers and pharmacies as well. And I think the pharmacies are better positioned to offer 24/7 service, and many of them are continuing to do so. So they do figure prominently still, with over 500 pharmacies offering COVID-19 vaccine at this point in time. So we're of course happy to adjust our service offering depending on need, but at this point in time, we're finding that the broad range of service hours is aimed at addressing the needs of a broad range of the population, including shift workers who may have unusual working hours.
Thank you for that. Another issue is, believe it or not, there are still people out there who believe there's a charge for this vaccine. It is free no matter where you get it, as far as I can tell. Has Toronto Public Health put out that message more vigorously to get some of the unvaccinated and the hesitancy to come forward, as many still believe, some believe, that there is a charge for it, and messaging that it's free, I think has been a vital piece since day one. I'm just wondering what's going on now.
Through the chair, I'm sorry to hear that there is that misinformation, and I would suggest, Councillor, that there are other pieces of misinformation in respect to the vaccine that are also unfortunately circulating in and around the community. So I can undertake to speak with our communications partners and with our other healthcare partners who are part of the vaccination campaign to make sure that we're getting the message out there. Our community ambassadors, of course, are another important method by which to get information out to communities that might otherwise have difficulty engaging through other channels of communication. So certainly I'll take that away, Councillor, and make sure that we're addressing that along with other bits of misinformation that unfortunately are circulating in regards to the vaccine.
My next question is regarding family physicians who really weren't in the initial mass vaccination piece. I'm just wondering what role they'll be playing in the future when it comes to maybe boosters or an annual COVID vaccine. Are family physicians going to be a part of the initiative, or are they still going to be sort of a secondary source?
So through the chair, as you know, Councillor, the organization of healthcare is under provincial purview. It's my understanding that there are increasing conversations between the provincial government, groups like the Ontario Medical Association and others around how better to engage family physicians in the COVID-19 vaccine efforts. So I would request that you stay tuned. I understand that there are more and more family physicians and practices that are coming on board to COVID-19 vaccination and participating in the campaign. And I anticipate that as a result of those conversations that are happening now, that more of them will eventually come on board, recognizing that there are some challenges, not the least of which is the virtual care that's being provided at this point in time for a number of practitioners.
I did have one more question about boosters, but I see I'm at 5 minutes, so I'll squeeze it in. What should we tell people when we get calls about boosters?
So, Councillor, what I would say for now is that these questions are still very much in active discussion. And of course, what we do on the ground will be based on advice and the program decisions that are made at the federal level and at the provincial level. So as soon as we have information from those levels of government, we will be sure to communicate with our public regarding boosters.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak. Now there we are. We have Deputy Mayor Bylaw with some questions.
Dr. DeVille, I'm hoping that you can help me answer a question that I'm getting from my constituents that I don't know how to answer. A lot of them are seeing other jurisdictions having a really strong vaccination program, but at the same time, they're really pushing hard rapid tests. They have it everywhere for free or very, very cheap available. And they keep asking, why aren't we doing that here in Ontario? Why don't we have it? Is it effective, not effective? Why aren't we using all the tools available?
So through the chair, thank you for that question, Councillor. This is another one of those issues that actually does fall largely under provincial purview. So I know that there are certain programs that the province has in respect of rapid testing, particularly directed towards workplaces and businesses. I understand as well that there are active discussions happening now around what other circumstances might actually benefit from the increased use of rapid testing. So I'm happy to keep you and other councillors up to date as to what is happening in those provincial conversations as they make some decisions on what happens next.
Is your opinion that it would be worthwhile, that it is a tool that we should be pushing for, Doctor?
So through the chair, and I apologize, there's some noise in the background, which I hope is not affecting what I'm saying here. But Councillor, there are some circumstances, I think, where there are some benefits. It would be difficult to go through the entire list, but I know that you know, what's being looked at right now by the province is that as certain thresholds are reached, as certain levels of community transmission are reached, might there be more advantage to using this rapid testing methodologies that are available to help support the response. But as I understand it, right now, a lot of focus being placed on driving up vaccination rates and using existing testing methods in those areas where they're most likely to deliver specific value that is actionable.
Okay. And this morning I was also reading that Metrolinx is launching a pilot on surface testing and air samples. Are you familiar with this? And is this something that you're thinking of recommending for TTC as well?
So through the chair, Councillor, I had not heard specifically of that action or that proposal by Metrolinx, and certainly happily will take that offline and look into it, and can reconnect back with you in your office on what that looks like and whether in fact that's something worthy of pursuit or consideration here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Are there any other members of the committee wanting to ask questions? I don't see any hands. I don't think. Okay, well then, Dr. DeVille, you may wish to just stay for the conclusion of the item, and including we do have a deputation who has now arrived, I'm pleased to tell you, our friend Mr. Moran, and so perhaps is he available there on the phone now? Okay, Mr. Moran, good morning, and you have 5 minutes as usual. We will revert back to accommodate you since you have been kind enough to call, and you have 5 minutes and there may be some questions for you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to start my timer here, Ms. Mayor Tory, and remember, my mom called me Derek. I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied in doing so as fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. So in this report, it refers to any mandatory vaccination policy or program recognizes legislated or regulatory exemptions. In my written presentation, I provide a link and screenshot from a Government of Canada publication that says, it's from the Canada Communicable Disease Report. It's a supplement called the Canadian National Report on Immunization from 1996 that somebody on the internet found. And it mentions, unlike some countries, immunization is not mandatory in Canada. It cannot be mandatory because of the Canadian Constitution. And I just want to point out, Mayor Tory, unlike most City of Toronto councillors, you actually took an oath of office to be a member of the Toronto Police Services Board, which said that you would uphold the Canadian Constitution. So based on that, and since you are the CEO of the corporation of the City of Toronto operating as John Tory, that it would seem that you would now have to resign from the Toronto Police Services Board because of making vaccines, I guess, mandatory at the City of Toronto. So I just want to remind something that you said at September 8th, before you handed the microphone over to Dr. Davila. You were talking about dispelling misinformation about vaccines and COVID. Your quote is saying, make sure people know the facts based on the science. speaking of the facts and speaking of science, I would now like to ask Dr. Davila if she would present her remarks. And I just want to point out that nowhere can anyone go to actually verify as a fact that Dr. Davila shares her science that she uses to base her decisions upon with the public. And you may recall a few months ago at the police board, I mentioned that, Scott Duncan even mentioned that if Dr. Davila claims that her decisions and advice and recommendations are all based on science, but she does not provide and share that information with the public, that she's actually committing a breach of trust. So maybe she wants to comment on that after I'm done. So one fact about vaccines that most people may have not heard about, and this is from, I provide the link from yahoo.com, says an award-winning BBC radio presenter died due to complications of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccination. The coroner has concluded pathologist Tumo Pawlowski told the coroner that Ms. Lisa Shaw, who was a well-known presenter for BBC Newscastle, was fit and healthy before receiving the vaccination. Asked about the underlying cause of the fatal clotting on her brain, Dr. Paul Vaccination said the clinical evidence strongly supports the idea that it was indeed vaccine-induced. Now, another thing that Twitter was trying to debunk recently, that being misinformation about COVID vaccines, was that COVID vaccines were gene therapies. So they had a quote from something called Genomics Education Program. That gene therapies involve deliberate changes to a patient's DNA in order to cure or alleviate a genetic condition. This can be by adding a functional copy of a gene, disabling the gene that makes a faulty product, or changing gene activation. The mRNA from the vaccines does not enter the cell nucleus or interact with the DNA at all, so it does not constitute gene therapy. Gene therapies can have long-lasting effects because they permanently change the cell's DNA, with these changes being inherited by any daughter cells that result if the cell divides. In contrast, mRNAs are always transitory and are not inherited by daughter cells, making them ideal for use in vaccines. I just want to point out before my time runs out that I provide the link, look in Moderna's own annual report. I provide the link and the screenshot where Moderna even admits in their own annual report that currently mRNA is considered a gene therapy product by the FDA. So that's what everyone's forcing people to put in their bodies. Not a vaccine, but a gene therapy, and that's wrong. And that's my time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Are there any questions of Derek Moran? Okay, I see none. I'll thank you very much for taking the time to participate with us today. Thank you. Are there any other members of the committee wishing to ask questions of Dr. Davila, who I think is still with us? Okay. Are there any speakers? If there are none, I would just like to say a few words, just because we have the opportunity in the context of the broader vaccination issue, and just turn the clock on there. First of all, I want to just say, and it's in regard to the vaccination, proof of vaccination issue as opposed to the vaccination program in the broader sense, that I first of all want to say thank you to the businesses out there who have had to deal with it one day now, and hopefully that's beginning to establish some means of employing this policy that are acceptable to them. But I understand there's a sacrifice involved in that. I went through presenting proof twice myself yesterday and found it to be quite smooth, but admittedly in both cases it was with larger companies which will have larger numbers of staff members that can perhaps be allocated to perform this task. But certainly the actual act itself of showing the proof was straightforward, took very little time at all. And I just want to continue to put the message out there, in this case through a public meeting of our executive committee, that I believe that if businesses and consumers, people, are both patient, that there's every reason to believe that this necessary policy that is going to help us to keep businesses open, keep schools open, keep reopening and not have any setbacks, can go very smoothly. In the case of the city, we've reported publicly, I have and others, that we had literally a handful of inquiries about this yesterday across a city of 3 million people with thousands of businesses and establishments that are affected by this proof of vaccine policy. And I'm very gratified by that, because I think it means not only did businesses start to make the adaptation themselves, but it also, I think, suggests that people avoided turning this into any kind of a confrontation or an ideological issue or anything like that, and really treated each other in the respectful, civilized manner that we would always hope for in the city. And we've proven that as a city over and over again, whether it comes to demonstrations or a host of other things, that we can do these things and we can have different views and different thoughts as to how these things should go, but that in the end we behave in a respectful manner. And I want to say thank you to people for that. I should say that I'm not one of those who's worried about the ultimate disposition of these funds that have been announced, although I think it was announced during the election, so as a result there's probably some follow-up work to be done of money from the Government of Canada for ultimately would go to the provinces, but I think some of it would come to us, and this is further to some of the comments made by a couple of members of our committee today. I think that there has been a very good track record established so far during the pandemic of the other governments providing for funds that ultimately, in the appropriate manner and in the appropriate amount, get made available to us, because in many cases we're actually delivering or enforcing or otherwise responsible for these policies on a local level. And so I think the concerns that were raised by, I believe it was Deputy Mayor Thompson, with respect to enforcement and the funding of that, we will find our way to seeing that addressed in some way or other with the support of the other governments. I see no need as Mayor of Toronto to be demanding that or otherwise making a fuss about that, because I think they know that we are in need of this assistance. And I should say that throughout the rest of the pandemic on other matters, these governments have been very responsive to our needs and have been very forthcoming, and quickly so, with regard to providing us with the financial resources we need to either keep the transit system going or to carry out certain COVID-specific tasks that fall to us to hand out. The final thing I will say is that this will not stop me from reiterating something that was in my letter to the federal leaders at the time of the election campaign, and I've mentioned it subsequent to that. Our top priority does remain, notwithstanding what I said about how we've been treated very well in the past, getting a commitment from the two governments with respect to safe restart funding, as it was called in the initial phase. We saw a transit ridership presentation this morning. It's going to take some time for that ridership to come back, though it is coming back to about a level of, say, 45% now, but 45% is way shy of 100. And as a result, that produces right now and going forward, even as ridership continues to improve, a significant financial shortfall for the city. And the other governments are well aware of these numbers and well aware of our needs and our projections in this regard into 2022. And I hope they will find the opportunity as soon as possible. I know the premiers are meeting tonight, and I hope they will put this on their agenda to discuss with the federal government. And I will be embarking on a series of discussions with the federal government. I actually have already since the election to put this right back at the top of the list for cities in general, but also for the City of Toronto, so that we can proceed with Councillor Crawford through our budget process, knowing that they will support us again. And the final thing I'll say in the remaining 20 seconds is simply to reiterate, because I don't think it's too often enough that we can reiterate the plea. We saw a presentation this morning indicating that there are literally tens of thousands of people who are now not only qualified for their second dose and have received their first dose, so they've got over the hurdle of receiving a vaccination, but they're overdue for their second dose. And so we're putting a big effort on those residents of the city and communicating with them, trying to comfort them, reassure them, support them, offer clinics close to them that are accessible to them, but they have to make the ultimate decision to get vaccinated. And of course, that's going to help us as we move to get to 80%, which will happen imminently, fully vaccinated, and then move on to keep going towards 90. And I just urge people to, if they know someone who's not vaccinated fully or at all, to please urge them to do so, comfort them, reassure them, inform them, draw their attention to where the clinics are, because we need to do that in order to keep us moving forward on a very strong recovery for the city. So thank you for indulging me, members of the committee, on those comments, but they're as much directed to members of the public, just because I think we have to keep up a pretty relentless campaign in this regard. Any others wishing to... And I have a motion here, which comes out of the work, I think, of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, but it's a motion that has to do with Human Rights Code-related accommodations for exemption. It just made an amendment to the existing recommendation 1 and we'll put it up so that you can now read what it says. I'll just read it because it's not that long. City Council will request the Province of Ontario to consult with people with disabilities, support persons, and other equity-deserving groups, and ensure that any mandatory vaccination policy or program takes into consideration legislated or regulatory exemptions or human rights code-related accommodation requests for exemption. And that's just amending the original wording of that. And so I'll see if there are any questions on this recommendation I've now put on the record. I'll just go back to the screen with the members of the committee if I can. I'll just see if anybody can speak up and see if they have any. I think it's fairly straightforward, and I don't see that it should cause a lot of questions, but since it was just put up, I wanted to give you the opportunity if you had any questions. Okay, so I will then move, if there's no one else to speak, the recommendations including, well, I'll first call the question on the amendment, and I've moved the amendment to the recommendation number 1, and I'll call the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And then the item as amended, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. That brings us then to EX 26.1, and that was held down by Councillor Pasternak. It's the mail-in voting and contribution rebate programs in the 2022 general municipal election. We have no deputants, so we'd move straight in then to questions of staff, which I think is what you wanted to do. Councillor Pasternak, so over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess when you read through this, you ask yourself, well, security and avoiding fraud. And if I read this correctly, no one is required to submit photo ID or upload any kind of guarantee of signature. What security measures are in place to make sure the person requesting the ballot is actually the person who's going to send in the ballot?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through the Mayor, people are required to upload identification or provide us a photocopy of ID with their mail-in application so that we can confirm their identity. We also require electors who choose to vote by mail to sign a declaration form that confirms that they're eligible to vote. When they apply to vote by mail, we ensure that they're on the voters list, and if they're not, then they have to complete a voters list amendment application form.
So in the most recent federal election, those who requested a mail-in ballot could not go to a local polling station and vote. They had to wait for their ballot and send it in, if I understand that rule. In fact, people told me about that barrier. Is the city going to adopt the same policy? Once you're registered for a mail-in ballot, you really can't scoot off to your local polling station and vote?
Through the Mayor, yes, it's a very similar process in Toronto so that we don't have electors that are double voting. So when somebody applies to vote by mail, we actually in our electronic data system mark them as a conditional elector, conditionally voted, until we get their mail-in package back, and then we actually mark them as voted. So generally the rule is that if you apply to vote by mail, then you've conditionally voted once we get your application returned.
Now, the only time we've really tried this was the Scarborough by-election. Is that correct?
That's correct. Toronto did mail-in voting for the first time in the by-election.
And other than the labor-intensive aspect of, I guess, opening up the ballots and seeing who they voted for, were there any other irregularities? Did you catch any situations in which there was attempted voter fraud, or there was not?
Through the Mayor, we did not. We had no other issues with the mail-in voting program pilot. It went very smoothly. We were quite surprised that the amount of returned ballots, I think it was 99%, were able to be tabulated without any rejection from the tabulator machine. The small number that were rejected, we adjudicated, the clerk and I, and basically sort of, reviewed them for voter intent. The voter intent was clear, and most of them had been rejected by the tabulator for things like quite frankly, a coffee mark on their ballot when they had voted. They obviously had a cup of coffee and it wrinkled the paper, so the tabulator wasn't able to smoothly take that piece of paper in. So generally, there were no issues at all.
So next is languages, multiple languages. Will the mail-in ballots be available in multiple languages more than just English?
Through the mayor, the mail-in ballots will not be available in multiple languages. We did look at it and it is prohibitively expensive. What we will do, given that we have multilingual electors in our city, we will ensure that the mail-in ballot instructions and communication that goes out includes information in the 10 most spoken languages in the city that directs them that they can call 311 if they need further information or instruction in their own language, so that we're ensuring that they do have that available if they need it.
And Braille?
We're actually looking at Braille right now. So generally speaking, we do include Braille in some of our communication to ensure that all election information is accessible. And we are exploring a Braille mail-in ballot currently.
So just one more comment before wrapping up. I understand that these can be mailed back or there's drop boxes at each polling station.
We haven't determined yet where we're going to put the drop boxes. What we did in the by-election, Councillor, is we had them at 2 of the advance vote locations, and they were secured to a pole with padlocks. They were monitored by CCTV camera by corporate security 24/7. And we also ensured that the box had, I think the correct technical language is, exchanges, sort of their metal sort of diagonal pieces of metal that sort of go through the box to ensure that somebody can't reach in and actually pull out a ballot. And John will attest that I actually tried to do that to ensure the security of our drop-in ballot boxes. And he's got a photograph of me trying to break into one. And unless you're a contortionist, you could not move your arm in a way through those exchanges in order to take a ballot out.
Okay.
So we will have drop boxes. We're not sure where yet, likely at advanced vote locations.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Are there any other members of the committee wishing to ask questions of Ms. Murray or any other staff member? Yes, Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to know, when will the mail-in ballots be counted, and will we have those results on election day?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through the mayor, what we did through the by-election, what we plan on doing through the general election is actually having a series of tabulations of mail-in ballots. So generally, people can vote by mail after nominations close after September 1st. So we have a fairly long period of time for mail-in voting, and we're likely going to tabulate and adjudicate those over the course of that period of time, so that we're not waiting to tabulate everything on election night because it would be difficult to get the results in time. So that when we get to election night, the amount of mail-in ballots that we still have to tabulate will be small, and we'll be able to ensure that the election results are communicated to the public in a timely manner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Any other, Deputy Mayor Thompson? Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much. Through you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. In answering Councillor Pasternak's question about the drop box, you were clear in terms of how that's going to work. How is the mail-in aspect going to work? I'll give you an example. We sent out from my office a newsletter a few months ago, and many of those newsletters didn't actually get to the homes. Not sure why. We've asked Canada Post and so on, and there are irregularities associated with mailing and so on. I'm just wondering how you're preparing to account for that.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through the mayor, so we did deal with that through the by-election, and what we did, Councillor, is we worked very closely with Canada Post on the distribution of the mail-in ballots. And when we got closer to election day, we actually had our staff go and pick up the mail because we couldn't afford the delay. So we were doing pickups twice a day. I think it was 3 to 4 days prior to election day to ensure that we were able to get those ballots back in a timely manner and didn't have to wait for Canada Post to do the drop off to us. The second thing that we've done that we did in the by-election, and it seemed to work really well, is we built into the application for mail-in voting a status monitoring aspect to it. So an elector that's waiting for a mail-in package can actually go in and see the status of their package. So they always know exactly where things are. So I hear your point. Absolutely, mail-in is, never 100%, but we did do a lot of work with Canada Post and have a really close partnership to mitigate that. The other comment I'll say is, interestingly enough, a lot of people use those drop boxes more than what we'd anticipated. They seem to prefer the drop box than the Canada Post mail. We had a higher number dropping off in the drop box and actually in a mailbox.
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Are there other members of the committee wanting to ask questions of staff, of Ms. Murray or anybody else concerning this matter of ballots and receipts and rebates? Okay, I will then go and see if we have any speakers. Anybody wishing to speak on this matter? Okay, seeing none, I will then call the question. There is a staff report with recommendations, and it's moved by Councillor Ainsley. And I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, that then brings us to item EX 26.6, the operating variance report for the 6 months ended June 30th, 2021. And this was held down by Deputy Mayor Bilo. Did you have some questions of staff?
Yes, Mayor. It's with regards to the variance around the shelter support and housing. You're suggesting a 4.4 million to go to a reserve account. Is that correct?
Hey, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, sorry, there was a beep of someone coming in or exiting and I missed the last part.
There's a recommendation to have 4.4 million going into a reserve account.
For you, Mr. Mayor, actually what we've done is we have looked at where there are underspends in certain areas, and there are a series of reserve recommendations, and that's to ensure that the underspends are being invested in the right areas and we're maximizing the funding that we've received from other levels of government first.
Okay, so this underspend is, if we look at the budget pre-pandemic, the underspend wouldn't be there. This is an underspend related to the budget that we approved, which was significantly higher on shelter support and housing. Is that, can you give me the numbers for what that budget was pre-pandemic and what we approved last year?
Yes, actually, just the one thing I do want to highlight, this variance report is a snapshot in time. It's a reflection of where we are really in a moment in time. So looking out the projection to the end of the year is actually the more important number to look at. But budget in 2021 for shelters and housing over budget 2020 is approximately $280 million higher from a COVID perspective and $28 million higher from a base funding perspective. And when we look at that and compare it to our 2020 spend, it's actually relatively consistent.
Okay. So the variance is in relation to this budget that is actually $280 million over, correct?
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, can you just repeat that?
I'm asking if the variance that you have it's in relation to actually a budget that is $280 million over what we had.
That's correct. Sorry. Yes, I thought you were saying the variance was 208. I just wanted to make sure I understood. So that's correct. The variance is tracking against the 2021 budget, but the variance, the underspend in June is different than the variance we're projecting for the end of the year. But yes, It is against a $280 million COVID variance from 2020, but also too, there was $28 million in addition to the COVID that was in 2021.
Okay, thank you so much. That clears it up for you. I just wanted to make sure, because I think there was some ideas that we're underspending to the levels that we had before, and is not quite the case. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear here today. Thank you.
Questions by members of the committee of staff with respect to the operating variance report? Okay. Seeing none, I would then move to speakers. Are there any speakers wishing to speak to this item 26.6, operating variance report? Okay. I will just, if I may, say, and it really just is to emphasize the point that was just made by Ms. Taylor, and I think was brought out by the questions from the Deputy Mayor. When you look at these operating variance reports, the most important thing to note, of course, is that they are at a point in time which is already well into the past, and don't necessarily reflect, and this is true in companies, it's true in governments, that it reflects a point in time at which budget sat at a certain point, and cannot reflect the future, although in this document there are forecasts as to where we're going to end the year. And I think it is very important in all of these areas, including our overall assessment as to how we're going to end up the year vis-a-vis an overall operating shortfall that we have, largely because of depressed transit revenues, that we look at this report in that context, especially now with respect to the pandemic. And I'll just repeat what I said earlier with regard to things that have made up that shortfall, that by and large, over the course of the pandemic, the other two governments have been very good at recognizing both the existence of and the magnitude of the numbers that affect the City of Toronto, perhaps more so than any other city in the country because of our size, and coming through to help us with that, and I'm optimistic they will in this case as well. But I also want to make the point, I think, that again Deputy Mayor Bailão was making in her questions, and I hope that Ms. Taylor answered, namely that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars more caring, as well we should, caring for the homeless. We've done it in a way that I think has been thorough. We've done it with some resistance and some obstacles that stood in our way, but we've tried nonetheless to be as thorough and as compassionate as we could be, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that. And certainly when I've had a chance to be on panels and discussions with other mayors around the country and around the continent for that matter, I think the efforts that Toronto has undertaken through the excellent work done by our staff in shelter support and housing and in other parts of the government has been exemplary. And so I just would want to acknowledge that, especially within the context that Deputy Mayor Bailão was trying to bring out, which is that this was perhaps a slight bit of underspending on what was a dramatically increased budget. And, like any other budgeting you do your best estimate, especially in unpredictable times like during a pandemic. And sometimes it comes in over and sometimes it comes in under, which is why we have these reports. But it also doesn't necessarily reflect at all where we'll end up the year. So those are my comments. Are there any other members wishing to make any comments? Okay. Well, seeing none, then I will call for Councillor Crawford, as I did with the other matters that were budgetary matters and financial matters, to move the report and the recommendation contained therein. Councillor Crawford, thank you.
I'll move, Mr. Mayor.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda. Is there any other business anybody wishes to raise before we conclude the meeting? Okay. Well, on that note, I'll declare the meeting terminated, and thank you all very much for your participation today. Thanks a lot.